Good afternoon. I'm Kathleen Chow, Program Manager of the Walnut Creek Library Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you to our virtual Finance 101 program, Special Needs Planning, Much More Than Government Benefits with Kirsten Howe. I'd like to thank our media and print sponsors, East Bay Times and Minimap Press Lafayette. Kirsten Howe is the founder and managing partner of Absolute Trust Counsel, a Walnut Creek law firm dedicated exclusively to providing comprehensive, client-centered estate planning services. Kirsten earned her law degree from UC Hastings College of Law and her undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan. This afternoon, Kirsten will be discussing planning for and protecting special needs children through estate planning. She will explain government benefits and special needs trusts, as well as limited conservatorships, life insurance, housing options, and other components of comprehensive special needs planning. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a donation to the Library Foundation to support their programs. Our website, www.wclibrary.org, is a place where you may donate or click on the link located in the chat box. Following our presentation, we will have a brief Q&A. You can submit your questions to Kirsten in the Q&A box at any time throughout the presentation. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kirsten Howe.
Hello there. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for that nice introduction. And I am very happy to be here. I've given a presentation for this series, the Finance 101, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years, the last 5 or 6 years, and I always enjoy it. This particular presentation, I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you because I think it's such an important topic. It covers a lot of things that a lot of people, I think, don't know about special needs planning and need to know. So I am going to share my screen. So I've been an estate planning attorney here in Walnut Creek for about, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so I've been an estate planning attorney here in Walnut Creek for a long time, 20 years or so, and I thoroughly enjoy doing special needs planning, so I'm very happy to be able to do this presentation today. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Today we are talking about special needs planning, which is much more than government benefits, although that tends to be one of the things that people focus on when they are talking about special needs planning. But we're going to cover a lot of other things, as Kathleen said in her introduction. But what we are going to be covering will include, first of all, what is special needs planning? You might not have a really clear understanding of that. We're going to talk about how every case is different. And at its core, for many families, what special needs planning is about is the parents planning to replace themselves in their children's lives. We can't talk about special needs planning without talking about the basics of estate planning, because special needs planning is a variety of estate planning. And we will talk about special needs trusts. We will, of course, also talk about government benefits, but you notice how I put it way down on the list. And then a few extra little points, one of them being a letter of intent, which is a thing that I hope to share with you, give you some ideas about what that might look like for your family if you have a special needs family member. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start out talking about what do we mean by special needs planning? Special needs planning is estate planning that involves a person who needs the help of others. A person who needs the help of others, we're going to refer to them today here as a special needs person. Someone who can't get by in life without some assistance, some sort of assistance. estate planning, so I say, what is special needs planning? Well, it's estate planning. Now I have to tell you and talk to you about what is estate planning. What do I mean when I say estate planning? I have clients who come into my office to talk to me about estate planning, and they don't really know what that even means. They just know that their financial advisor or their CPA or their next door neighbor said, you need to go do an estate plan. So just so we are all clear, estate planning is planning for yourself, your family, and your assets, so that if you become incapacitated or you die, things will go the way you want them to go. And I would add to that, things will go smoothly and things will be efficient, and you family won't be paying a lot of taxes or a lot of attorney's fees. But basically at its core, it's planning for yourself, your family, and your assets. When we have a person who needs the help of others included in our estate plan, we've got to do what we call special needs planning most of the time. And I'll explain, and there are some circumstances where maybe that's really not necessary. But it's not all about government benefits, as you will see. I keep hammering on that point. I hope by the end of today, you'll appreciate that. Okay, so it's very, very important to recognize that every case is different. In every case where we are doing special needs planning, what those cases have in common is that there's a special needs person, and that means someone who has an impairment that limits their ability to provide for themselves or care for themselves in some fashion. Could be mild, could be severe. Every case is different. And part of special needs planning, even though, I'm an attorney and my responsibility is the legal work, part of special needs planning for me is I need to understand what that impairment entails. How will that play out in the special needs person's life? So the impairment may not be a disability. It may be something that legally would not be considered a disability. And when I'm saying legally considered a disability, I'm talking about according to the Social Security Administration. There are lots of definitions in the world out there of the word disability. In the special needs world, it generally refers to the Social Security definition of disability. But we are called upon to do special needs planning for people who may not have that level of impairment. They are impaired, but not legally disabled. So the impairment could be cognitive, which can be, caused by a variety of things. It could be something from birth, such as Down syndrome or autism. It could be the result of an accident or an illness that caused some brain injury. The impairment could be physical, could be as a result, again, of an accident or something from birth, cerebral palsy. It could be just purely physical with no cognitive impairment whatsoever, but the physical impairment could be such that the person requires the help of another. And then sometimes the impairment is a mental health issue. People who have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia can be considered, first of all, they can be considered disabled by Social Security, depending on how severe it is. And it has to do with their ability to protect themselves, to take care of themselves, to take care of their money. Sometimes, oftentimes, mental health issues are undiagnosed. A lot of times what we're talking to our clients about is a child who has severe substance abuse problems. And those are, masked mental health issues oftentimes. But parents are concerned and they don't think that that child with the substance abuse issue can manage things for themselves, that they won't be able to live their full lives and get an inheritance and make good use of it. So there's all kinds of types of impairment. There's all kinds of levels of impairment, all kinds of reasons for the impairment. But the point that all of those cases have in common is that there is a potential inheritance that needs to be dealt with appropriately for that particular special needs person, the person with the impairment. Okay, and again, I'm going to keep saying this, every case is different. What they all have in common is that for whatever reason, whatever the impairment, whatever the level or degree of the impairment, this particular special needs person will need assistance. The family will need to provide them with money so that they can live successfully, and probably oftentimes that money needs to be controlled for them so that they can live successfully. So the financial piece of it is very important because, there are plenty of people who are very impaired, but are completely independent financially. Probably most or all of you are familiar with a very famous scientist, Stephen Hawking, who was severely disabled physically. He was a brilliant scientist, no cognitive impairment whatsoever, but he needed a lot of help. But he was financially very well off. He had a great job all through his life. He sold 1 million books, probably way more than 1 million books. He would not be what we would call a special needs person because he didn't need anybody to provide money for him, to support him, to protect him. He was perfectly capable of doing things for himself. He just needed physical assistance. The other thing that can be a distinction in special needs planning, when we're doing special needs planning, what we will do often is determined by who exactly it is that's doing the planning. So sometimes it's not as common, but sometimes the people doing the planning are grandparents. The grandparents have a grandchild who they recognize is a special needs child. The grandparents would like to make sure that there's enough money set aside for that child when the grandparents pass away. And so the grandparents have their estate plan done, and they want to include in their own estate plan some special needs planning for their grandchild. Now, that is much less common than parents planning their estate and including special needs planning for their disabled special needs child. Much more common for parents to be doing that. But grandparents, any grandparents out there in the audience, just keep that in mind. It's a really good idea to think about that. The other point is that sometimes when we're doing special needs planning, we are doing the client for whom we are doing the planning is the special needs person themselves. And I know that sounds funny, but just bear with me. What sometimes happens is a person who is a special needs person and is receiving specific government benefits that they very much want to keep. This special needs person suddenly gets a big pile of money. It could be a lawsuit. It could be an inheritance. Most often in our practice, it's been inheritances. So if they get this inheritance, grandma has died and she left me $100,000. And if I get this $100,000, I'm going to lose my government benefits. And just trust me on that. We haven't talked yet about government benefits, but many of the benefits that we are benefiting from, I guess is the word, if you have too much money, you would be disqualified. So this special needs person is about to inherit a bunch of money, and they don't want that loss of their benefits to happen. And so we are working with them to do some planning to prevent them from losing their benefits. Now, that's a very different case from the parents or the grandparents who are coming in to do special needs planning. And the big distinction is about whose money are we using for this planning. In the case of the parents and the grandparents who are planning for their disabled child or grandchild, the money that's being used in this plan belongs to the parents and grandparents. And the special needs child is never going to actually receive that money. The money is going to stay in the plan. It's the parents and grandparents' money. It will stay in the plan. The special needs child will not receive it directly. So we call that a third party plan because it's money of somebody else. In those situations where we're doing the planning for a special needs person who has suddenly inherited money or suddenly settled a lawsuit and now has too much money, that's their money. And so we are doing the planning with their own money. So we call that first party planning. And there is a difference between them. And we can talk about that maybe in the Q&A. It's not important for this conversation, but it's just important to understand that special needs planning covers both of those scenarios. It covers the scenario where someone's planning what to do with their money to benefit somebody else, and what it covers the scenario where the special needs person is trying to protect their own money. Okay, so what we're going to do is for today, we are going to talk about a typical case. So a few slides back, I said every case is different, and it could be mild impairment, severe impairment. We could be doing planning for an adult child. I have lots of clients who come to me to do special needs planning for their children. And the clients are in their 70s and the special needs child is in their 40s. That's not unusual at all. But for today, just for this conversation, what we're going to be talking about generally is a young family planning ahead for their young disabled child, because it kind of allows us to talk about a few more things that I think are important to cover. When the child is quite a bit older, it just presents different issues. So young family doing special needs planning for a young disabled child. And by young, I mean a minor. They haven't reached the age of 18 yet. And in our scenario that we're going to be talking about today, our typical case, we're going to assume that it's very clear that the child will never be financially independent. The child will not be able to care for himself or herself. And that's not always the case. In fact, those make some of the most challenging planning scenarios when we have a young child who has an impairment, but it isn't clear at all that that impairment is going to prevent the child when he's an adult many years from now from having a job. Those cases can be challenging, and there are plenty of children who have some mild impairment, mild autism, highly functioning autistic children. It's very hard for parents, so we have to plan carefully for them. But in today's discussion, we're going to assume that we're talking about a child who it's clear will never be financially independent. And so we know what we need to do. We need to plan this all out for this child. Okay, so, and I would say this is probably the most common case that we get, because I don't know, but I suspect that when the child is clearly that impaired, the parents, they pay attention. We need to take care of this. We can't afford to wait. So that tends to be our most common scenario. So in this scenario, what it really boils down to is that the parents have to come up with a plan that basically takes their place. So these parents, they provide care for their child. You know, they help the child get up in the morning, they get them dressed, they feed them, they bathe them, you know, depending on the child's level of impairment. They're doing a lot of just the hands-on care, which could also include, you know, taking the child to all their doctor's appointments and making all those medical decisions. And there's just so much that's rolled into that word care. And the parents have to do it, and they're gladly doing it because they love their child, but it has to be done. The parents also provide financial support to the child. The parents are paying for everything that this child needs. Whatever that is, it could be a cell phone, it could clothing, it's food, everything. They pay for it. So they've got to figure out a way that all of those things can still continue after the parents are gone. And one of the more challenging issues, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, we'll talk about each one of these things in a minute, is housing. Because these young children, remember, they're minor children, they live at home with their parents. And that works great because they're kids, they're young. It's a little bit different when they start to get older, and it can be very challenging. So let's look at each one of these three sort of legs of the stool that the parents provide for the child. One at a time, we'll explore them. First one is care. And you may not ever have thought about this, but I think if you do, you'll get what I'm saying and think, oh, well, that's really obvious, isn't it? There really are just three sources of care for someone who needs care. One is the unpaid labor of family and friends, and that's what the parents of these young children currently are doing. They take care of all the child's needs, and they don't charge the child any money. They do it for free. Then there's money, you know, savings, life insurance, that can be used to pay somebody to provide care. And then there are government benefits that can be used to pay for care. And we'll talk a little bit later about government benefits, but the parents, knowing this, that I have a child who's going to need care, need to take a look at these three things. And I'm just going to suggest right out of the gate that assuming that there will be unpaid labor of family and friends available to your disabled child after you die is probably not the best assumption to make. Much better to come up with a plan for some other way of paying for the care that the child will need. So really what the parents need to do is figure out a way to provide all the care that they've been providing themselves. And we have to plan for that. But there are two problems with that. First of all, oftentimes we find that parents underestimate exactly what it is they do. They just don't appreciate that how much time and effort they put into caring for their disabled child. This is very common. They often underestimate that during a 16 or 17-hour day, maybe 12 of those hours, 13, 14, are pretty much dedicated to that child. And again, it depends. Every case is different, but parents, in my experience, typically will underestimate exactly how much care they provide. The other thing is that parents really don't have any idea of how much the care they provide costs, because they're not paying for it. They're providing this care for free. So what we often recommend is that parents meet with a care manager. They engage the services of a care manager. A care manager is someone who they typically come from either nursing, they're RNs, or they come from the therapy world. They tend to be social workers, but in that realm, they're very experienced with caregiving, what's involved in caregiving. They're very experienced in basically stepping in and being the parent for someone else. But what I like to do is refer parents to a care manager so the care manager can do an evaluation. They can do an objective assessment of what exactly does this child need help with? What are all the things that need to be done? How much time does that take? What is the child capable of doing alone? Is the child at all capable of doing anything alone? Can the child be left alone? It's just important to get a really clear assessment of what amount of care will be necessary if we take the parents out of the equation. And the care managers also are very familiar with all the various care options in the community, whether it's private caregivers, whether it's a government benefit, whether it's some sort of assisted living housing situation. They're very familiar with all of that, and they can make recommendations about things that would be appropriate ways of getting the care that the child needs. And they, very importantly, can put a price tag on the care because they know what the resources are, they know what they cost, and they know how much care is needed. And then the second really critical professional that I like for my clients to work with is a financial advisor. Especially we're talking about, remember, our typical case, which is a young family with a young disabled child. Most young families don't have the amount of money that we would be talking about for a severely disabled child to be taken care of for the rest of their life. Most don't. And so they need to come up with a financial plan to get there. And the earlier they start working with a financial advisor, the better. But I see these three professionals, a care manager, a financial advisor, and the attorney who's got to pull it all together and make it legal, as really the team that needs to be in place for a good, solid special needs plan that's going to work and actually succeed. Okay, so that's about care. Now, there are other pieces of support that the parents provide. Remember, again, I said financial support, which is kind of very related to care because care costs money. So working with the financial advisor to come up with a way to make sure all the other expenses are going to be covered aside from the care is critical. And oftentimes what we are using, especially here with a young family, is life insurance. Now, life insurance may not be appropriate or even available to those parents I mentioned earlier who are in their 70s and they have a 40-year-old child. But when we have young parents, a young family, most young families are at least able to get life insurance, and life insurance can really be a nice feature, because with just a little bit of money up front, you can get a lot of benefit, especially if there is an untimely death. And remember, we're talking about young people. So these young parents, they have a long time to save the money, but what if something happens? What if there's an accident and they don't have that long period of time? That's where life insurance can really be very beneficial. And the financial advisor is the critical piece here. The financial advisor is going to work with the family, help them figure out, is life insurance an appropriate vehicle for you to create some wealth here, and also come up with a long-term plan. So you're not going to rely on life insurance. You're going to do what the rest of us do, which is sock your money away because you're saving for retirement. But unlike families who don't have a special needs child, this family that we are talking about, they have 3 retirements to save for. They save for mom's retirement, they save for dad's retirement, and they saving basically for the retirement of their special needs child. So it's really, really crucial to, as early as possible, start doing this financial planning. And that's not something that I do. That's not legal work. I do legal work, but I have colleagues who are very good at this kind of long-term planning to help families build wealth and use life insurance. Okay, so the last thing that needs to be replaced, the parents have been providing all along, is housing. It's, I think, very, very important to start as early as I get an opportunity to start talking to parents about this, inevitability. There will come a time when your special needs child is not going to be living with you anymore. And it might be better to explore your options now rather than at a time of crisis. And when I say, I'm being euphemistic, a time of crisis is, okay, mom and dad are now dead and the house has to be sold. And where is this special needs child going to live who's been living in this house his entire life with his parents? Making those plans, thinking it through, and really, very importantly, having the parents there and available to support the transition that is going to have to happen is so much better for the child. And if you can do it, thoughtfully, gradually, while the parents are there to participate in the transition. There's going to be a transition. It's either going to be abrupt or it's going to be well thought out and carefully done. So I always am trying to force parents to focus on that, because especially with my clients who come in their 70s, starting a special needs plan for their child in their 40s, they've got an adult child who's never lived anywhere but with the parents. And it works for the family. It's easy. Nobody has to make any changes. But in the long run, it's really not good for that child. It's much better if the parents can, with love and affection and attention and deliberation, help the child to make a transition that the child may very well end up liking a great deal. Not just because you have a disability doesn't mean you don't want to get away from your parents. We all did it at some point because we wanted to. So I really try to get parents to focus on this. And I'm just going to point out, housing does cost money. It's expensive, and there aren't as many options as we would like to have in the special needs community. And that's just the way it is. There are, things are changing. There are some housing developments that are going up and are up, designed specifically for sort of higher functioning young adults. They're sort of like assisted living facilities that we have for the elderly. So, the young people have an apartment, but there's community activities. There may be community dining room, and there's a lot of assistance and supervision built into that housing situation. So we're seeing more of that. And then there are group homes where, an adult disabled person can live with other adult disabled people with some adult supervision, a smaller setting, not a large assisted living facility style setting, but a smaller setting. And then, a lot of parents are starting to realize that they are going to have to make this happen themselves, that there just really aren't enough housing resources out there in the world for adult disabled people. And we've seen parents who take this project on, and they may team up with a group of similarly situated parents and purchase a home and hire caregivers to supervise these children who are able to live, with that level of independence. And I'm doing a podcast episode. We have a podcast at Absolute Trust Counsel. In a few weeks, November 3rd, we do it live on Facebook and on YouTube, and you can watch it if you want, or you can go to our website sometime in mid-November and watch the video. But I'm going to be talking to Susan Riggle with Living Unlimited, which is a nonprofit up in, I think it's Sonoma County, about some of the really creative things that her organization is doing in this realm. So I invite you to watch that, or, listen to it after it comes out as a podcast. I think that what she's doing is very interesting, and it's very representative of what's happening out there in the special needs community. Okay. So let's get down to the legal work now. The lawyer has a role. All of these things we've been talking about are sort of more, I'm counseling them, I'm advising them, but now there actually is a legal piece to special needs planning. And it starts with an estate plan, as I said earlier, the estate plan being the plan for what happens to you, to your family, and to your assets after you die. And the core of pretty much every estate plan in California is going to be a revocable living trust. The revocable living trust will own some of your assets. It'll own your home, it'll own your investment accounts, it'll own your vacation home if you have one. And the revocable living trust will say, when I die, this is what I want to happen to all my property, and it lays it out. In the case of a family planning for a special needs child, the revocable living trust typically will say, when both parents have died, we've got 3 children, we're going to leave each child a third, and the third that is going to our special needs child is not going to our special needs child, it's going into a special needs trust. So these families typically will have the revocable living trust that everybody else has, and they also will have a special needs trust, which is a separate trust. And because the special needs trust is going to be receiving the money of another person, the parents, not the special needs child's money, it's the parents' money, that's a third party trust. Just in case anybody's tracking this at home. So the special needs trust is then going to hold the inheritance of the special needs child, and that inheritance will be managed for that child according to its terms. So the key features of a special needs trust are that it complies with the federal law such that it will not interfere with any government benefits that the child may be receiving or may in the future need to receive. It's written in compliance with all of those laws. And it designates a trustee who will manage the trust assets and make distributions. Distributions means when we take money out of the trust in order to spend it on our special needs beneficiary. We appoint a trustee who will manage and make the distributions. And it's very important. I have a couple of points to make about that. It's very important that the trustee of a special needs trust has the ability to follow the rules and to not make mistakes and to not make a distribution that could cause the beneficiary to lose their government benefits. It's not easy. It requires a lot of studying. It requires the trustee to learn all of those government benefits rules. And I would say it really requires the trustee to hire an attorney to give them the right guidance and advice. And I'm going to say that well over half of the families who come to me to do special needs planning, their first choice for trustee of this special needs trust for their disabled child is one of their other children. That's just the automatic go-to. And if any of you've done regular old revocable living trust planning, that's very common. It's very common for the parents to pick a child to be the trustee after they die. And that works just fine. But I do want to point out that a special needs trust is different. It's different in that it's going to last a long time. It's going to last for the whole life of that special needs child. It's difficult. It's complicated to administer, and a mistake can be pretty disastrous. We don't want our special needs child to lose their government benefits. And it can also put the special needs child and their trustee sibling into a weird relationship where it just creates some tension that might not be ideal. And it's also important to think about that trustee child. We want our children to grow up and have happy, full lives. We want them to go, get the education they want, get the job they want, get the career they want, have a family, get married, have children, have friends, have hobbies. All of that takes time and energy. And if the trustee child is also trying to manage all of this work for their special needs sibling, it's a lot. And it's very hard to be a special needs trustee without being in close proximity to the beneficiary. So, a trustee child would be kind of limited in where they can live geographically. So I try to point this out to my clients that, don't just be thinking about your special needs child, think also about the trustee child. And there are plenty of other resources. A real common thing that we talk about with our special needs parents is the idea of hiring a professional trustee. The professional trustees they're very good at what they do. They know the law. They know how to make the right kinds of distributions. They know how to manage the money and make it last. Because remember, this money has got to last as long as our child is alive. And that's very important. So I always try to have that conversation. And if I can't persuade a family that the child should not be the trustee and they want to go ahead and make that child the trustee anyways, I usually can persuade them to allow the child trustee to step down from their position and hire a professional to take their place. If, when the time comes, the job seems like it's too much and they can't do it. So that's just a little bit of advice for you. If you're thinking about doing special needs planning, you might want to build some kind of an off-ramp into that trustee job. Okay, so you know, we had to get there. We had to talk about government benefits, and I'm, what can I say? It is a key piece of special needs planning. Usually, the government benefits that we're talking about are supplemental security income, which we call SSI, and Medi-Cal. Those are the two main benefits. And in special needs planning, our beneficiaries, our special needs children, they may be receiving other kinds of government benefits, but what is different about these two, as opposed to something like Social Security or Medicare, those Social Security and Medicare are what we would call entitlement benefits. So you get Medicare because you turn 65. That's it. You just get it. You don't have to prove that what your income is. You don't have to show them what your assets are. Social Security doesn't care. You get Medicare because you've reached 65. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Medicare doesn't care. Same with Social Security. When you retire and you submit your paperwork, you start receiving your Social Security. You never have to show them what's in your bank account. You don't have to show them what other sources of income you have. You just get it. So those are entitlement benefits. SSI and Medi-Cal are different. In order to qualify for SSI and Medi-Cal, you have to have low income, low resources. So you have to go through this process of proving that you don't have $1 million in the bank, and you're not earning $10,000 a month in salary. These are needs-based benefits, and I'm going to talk about each one a little bit so you have a better understanding. First, we'll talk about SSI, supplemental security income. This is a cash benefit, again, for people who have limited resources. It's a combination of state and federal money. So the amount that you get depends on the state that you live in. The federal government, they contribute a certain amount across the board, doesn't matter what state you live in. And then each state gets to decide how much they want to add to that benefit. So currently in California, the maximum SSI benefit is $1,040.21 per month. That's the maximum benefit. Not everyone receives the maximum benefit. And the maximum benefit for a minor child living at home with their parents, a little bit less, $921.75. What SSI is designed for is it's meant to pay for housing and food. That's it. That's all it's meant to pay for. So think about this, $1,000, $1,040 per month. Can you imagine living in the Bay Area on $1,000 a month? It's not enough. And that's why we have to do this special needs planning. That's why we have to get our parents to go buy life insurance, and why they have to invest wisely and they have to save money. It's not enough. So SSI, it's meant for housing and food, and you can only qualify for it if you have less than $2,000 worth of assets, and any income that you have, it gets subtracted from your benefit. That's why I say some people get the maximum benefit, some people don't get the maximum benefit. So if you are a disabled person and you actually are able to work a little bit, you can do that. You can earn some money, but there's a little bit of a penalty. Your SSI benefit will be reduced a bit. Similarly, remember, it's meant to pay for housing and food. If somebody else is providing you free housing or reduced rent housing, your SSI benefit is going to be reduced as well. And that's why the maximum benefit of 1,040 is not the maximum benefit for a minor child living at home, because the minor child living at home, the parents are providing housing, so their benefit is less. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of SSI. The other really important point about SSI, sometimes we aren't so concerned about that $1,000 a month. If we've got lots of money set aside through life insurance, through good investments, through solid savings plan, maybe we're not so worried about getting every last penny of SSI benefit. The parents might prefer that the child actually be provided housing through their special needs trust, that they don't pay rent, they don't have to go get an apartment, that the special needs trust will pay for their housing, and then they'll lose a bit of their SSI benefit, and that's okay. But what's really typically the most important thing about SSI is that if you qualify for SSI, you also qualify for Medi-Cal. So even if you don't need the maximum SSI benefit because your special needs trust is capable of providing housing, or some family member is capable of providing housing, you don't want to reduce the SSI benefit down to 0, because then you lose your Medi-Cal. So just as a reminder, this is where I'm saying that having a really well-educated and experienced special needs trustee is critical when we're trying to figure out, well, what do we want to really spend our special needs trust money on? Are we willing to reduce the SSI benefit? Yes, but not 100%, because really the big prize is the Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal pays for healthcare. And that is an extremely valuable benefit in terms of, peace of mind, but also financially. That paying for the healthcare of a severely disabled person, depending on the nature of the disability, can be, millions of dollars over a lifetime. So that Medi-Cal benefit is usually the thing that we are most concerned about preserving. And so we want to keep the SSI in place. And that's probably the main thing to say about Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is a lot of different programs. It's available to people who aren't disabled. But in this context, Medi-Cal is really a critical benefit. And so we're trying to preserve that usually. That's our goal. Okay, so the last piece, a couple of the last pieces I want to talk to you about before we turn it over for questions is, I always encourage my special needs parents to put together what I call a letter of intent. You can call it whatever you want. That's just happens to be what we call it. And what I want them to do is just put down on paper everything they know about this child. Particularly important where we have a child with cognitive impairment or a child who is not communicative. Very important that the parents pass on not only money, but knowledge. And so what we do is we have a template, I guess is what I would say. It prompts the parents. It asks questions, what do you want people to know about this? So, we go through talk about medical history, talk about the medications, talk about what they like to do. What TV shows do they like? What toys do they play with? Who are their friends? What things do they not like? What kind of clothes do they like to wear? Anything that you can think of that would be useful to somebody else should be written down. And because remember, we're talking about at some point, the parents are going to have to replace themselves with another person or a group of people. So I give them this template and I encourage them to sit down and do it. And what's really important too, especially when we're talking about a young child, you got to keep updating it, because more medical history gets added, the child grows up, the child's not going to be playing with Legos anymore. Whatever it is, you keeping it up to date is a really nice favor that you can do for your child and for whoever is going to be stepping in to assist when the parents are gone. We have, I'm just going to let you know, on our website, we have all kinds of resources in the special needs area. We have a whole page of our website devoted to special needs planning. So you're welcome to go there and use any resource that's useful to you. And there's a link here, which I think you'll be receiving the PowerPoint presentation yourselves. So you don't have to write this down, you'll get it. But I invite you to go check that out and make use of anything that you find there that's helpful. So, all right, I'm going to, I guess, open this up for questions.
That would be great. If you could stop the sharing.
Oh, sure. Oh.
Wonderful. We do have a few questions, so I'll begin. First question is, my child is an adult with bipolar disorder and a lot of emotional challenges, and who needs help with things like filling out government forms and understanding government communications. How should I begin to find a care manager to talk to?
Okay, well, that's a really great question. I would say if you have an attorney that you've been working with, they probably know care managers. If you don't, call my office and we can give you some referrals to care managers. They have a national association, which I can't remember the name of it because they changed it a couple of years ago. But talk to your attorney who helps you with your special needs planning, or call my office.
Thank you. Next question. How can I access the podcast about Living Unlimited?
Okay. The podcast has not been recorded yet. We are going to be recording it on November 3rd. So if you would like to watch it live while it's actually happening, you'll go on Facebook and watch it. If you want to call my office for more specific information or help how to get that, please do so. Once we've finished the broadcast, the live broadcast, we are recording it. So it will be a video on our website, and it will also be a regular podcast episode that you access it on your phone, just like any other podcast. But that takes a couple of weeks. So we're recording it November 3rd. We don't actually launch it out into the world for a couple of weeks because we have to edit it and make it better.
Next
But again,
question.
call my office if any of that feels impossible. Just call my office. We're happy to point you in the right direction.
Diane asks, how do ABLE, capital ABLE, accounts work? Are they fee heavy?
Oh, okay. So ABLE accounts are a special kind of savings account that were created in the last, 5 or so years, maybe 10, that allow people who are receiving these needs-based government benefits to save money. Remember, I said you can't get SSI if you have more than $2,000, unless you put that money into an ABLE account. Is a very specific kind of account. And each state has its own ABLE program. We have one finally in California. It took us a little while to get that. So how it works is each person, each government benefits recipient is allowed to have one ABLE account, and we are allowed to put $16,000 per year into it. So if grandma puts 5,000 into it, mom and dad can only put 11,000 into it that year. So 16,000 from all sources per year. And you can accumulate up to $100,000 in an ABLE account, and it doesn't count against you for your SSI or Medi-Cal eligibility. Are they fee heavy? That I'm not sure about, but I suspect they're not too fee heavy. But you can shop around. Just because you live in California doesn't mean you have to use the California ABLE. So you can shop all the other states and find the one that seems best for your family.
Next question. What happens to leftover dollars in the trust after a special needs adult dies?
Okay. So this special needs trust that we've been talking about, remember, it's a third party trust. It's the parents' money. The parents wrote the trust. So when the special needs beneficiary dies, the money will go to whoever the parents have designated. The trust will tell us where that money is supposed to go. Could go to the other siblings, could go to a charity, it could go to some other family member. It's whatever those parents have decided.
If my daughter is going to be our special needs son's trustee, couldn't we just leave all of the estate to her and she can disperse funds accordingly?
Well, there's yes, but that is not what I would recommend. When you leave your entire estate to the one child, first of all, you're depending upon them to do what's right, regardless of what happens down the road. So maybe that daughter will get married and then divorced. Maybe that daughter gets married and her husband steals all the money, or he spends it improvidently, or maybe that daughter gets into a car accident and she gets sued, and now that judgment creditor takes that money away from her. There are lots of reasons why you really want that money protected in a special needs trust, because nobody can take it away. It's totally protected. And so yes, you can do that. I definitely would not recommend it.
Next one. My son doesn't have cognitive issues, but has a chronic medical condition that will need ongoing treatment throughout his life. Are there any special accounts, et cetera, to help fund these medical costs?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not really a financial advisor, but not that I'm aware of. I think you just have to figure out a financial plan to create that money. I mean, I know there are health savings accounts, but that's not what, I don't think that is the kind of thing that would work for this situation. That's usually employment related.
Next, thank you for all of the valuable information. I am a financial professional, and sometimes the concern that arises how the permanent residence or citizenship of the special needs a child affect what they can and cannot do with regards to an estate plan or accessing government benefits. Not really a question.
How the permanent residence, I guess I didn't follow that question. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's a question.
It's an observation. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
A couple of quick questions. Can a special needs child go to live with a relative in another state if something happens to the parents?
Okay. So that's something that I didn't particularly talk about. But it's an important point. It's worth spending a minute here on. Our scenario for today's discussion was a minor child at home living with the parents. When that minor child turns 18, what we typically would want the parents to do is get a conservatorship, and it's called a limited conservatorship, over that child, meaning the parents have legal rights. Now they can legally do things for this child who's legally an adult. In other situations, when your child turns 18, your rights are done. You are not allowed to tell them what to do, except, you have leverage, you pay the bills, but legally they're adults, they're on their own, they are responsible, they make their own decisions, and you don't have any right to access anything. With a special needs child, we typically need the parents to have legal rights over the child, so they do a conservatorship. So the answer to your question is, now, if the child is still a minor, and the parents die, then this relative would become the child's guardian. And that's the same as if the child wasn't special needs. They have to have a guardian. All minors have to have a guardian. If the child is an adult, then this relative would most likely be the conservator. And typically you would do the conservatorship or the guardianship in the state where the child is located. And then if you want to move them to another state, you have to move the guardianship or the conservatorship. So it's a legal process. But the answer is, yeah, probably you can, but you will have to get a judge to agree to allow you to move that child.
Okay, we have an update to a previous question. How does the permanent status or citizenship status of a special needs child affect what the parents can do in terms of estate planning or in terms of accessing government benefits?
Okay, I do not believe that, well, the estate planning is not going to matter. You can make a non-citizen a beneficiary of a trust that you've created. What the government benefits aspect of it, that's a little bit different. I do not believe that SSI, I'm not sure whether SSI is available for non-citizens. Medi-Cal is, but I don't know that that's true in other states. Medi-Cal is what we call Medicaid here in California, and California is very liberal on the non-citizens and even undocumented. But I'm not sure about SSI, and I just have not had to deal with that issue.
Last question. What happens to the special needs trust if the child is actually able to get a job and support themselves?
Oh, that's okay. So I'm going to say it depends. Depends on what this trust says. I believe that, especially in the situation where we think that maybe that's going to be possible, but we don't know for sure, we want to write the special needs trust to be flexible enough that the trustee is not limited to making only expenditures for things other than food and shelter. We want the trustee to be able to say, okay, well, he doesn't need to be that restricted. We can make distributions for all kinds of things. So the trust itself will tell us what can and can't be done, and we encourage flexibility when we can.
Thank you. That was the end of our questions.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Kirsten, and thank you all for joining us today. All of you who have registered for this event will receive a link to the recorded video and presentation on YouTube. If you enjoyed tonight's program and look forward to more, we invite you to make a gift to the Library Foundation on their website or from the link in the chat box. Your gift really does make a difference. We hope you'll return next month for our Live from the Library program, Technically Food, a conversation with author Larissa Zimberoff. Larissa and her guest, Leslie McClurg of WKQED, will be discussing the rapidly changing food landscape, the mysterious new foods, and the tech startups behind this shift. You can find more information and the registration link on the Walnut Creek Library Foundation website. Thank you again for attending, and good night.